All right, everybody. Breaking news last night, a shams bomb or whatever we're calling it these days. The first step of the Celtics retool dropped last night, late last night. Jrue Holiday, we say goodbye, dear friend. Jrue Holiday going kind of back in air quotes here to the Portland Trailblazers for Anfernee Simons and 2 second-round picks. What up, everybody? This is your boy Will Weir, giving you my quick off the top reactions to what happened last night as the Celtics make the first move of their offseason with the NBA draft coming up tomorrow night. If you've been on our Instagram, you've already seen my co-host Greg and his thoughts. So wanted to hop in here real quick and let you know my own thoughts on where we're at here with this news that really kind of came out of nowhere, from the sense that, did you have Anfernee Simons mocked as a Jrue Holiday destination, as a Jrue Holiday trade partner? Did you see him going to Portland? I certainly didn't. Definitely nowhere that I have seen was this on the table. So this is a really fascinating move from Brad Stevens to think about. And I think there's a couple different angles that we need to try to look at to really understand this move and then start to analyze it. So there's one component of it where it is, roster, talent, value based. What does this mean for the actual play on the court and the fit with everybody? And of course, taking into context the Jason Tatum injury. The second side of this is going to be the contract, the salary. What does that mean? All of this second apron talk. Where is the money going? What does this change about how they operate going forward? So there's two different avenues that we need to explore. First and foremost, though, shout out to Jrue Holiday. Jrue Holiday was an absolute game changer. We loved Marcus Smart here in Boston, but for quite a while, we had talked about, Jrue Holiday is the best version of Marcus Smart that we could ever get. And then we actually got Jrue Holiday. And with that came a championship. And so for that, Jrue Holiday, as the saying goes, will never have to buy a drink in this town again. So anytime that he comes to Boston, he is going to be felt at as a instrumental part, as he was for that championship. And, I think it goes maybe a little bit under the radar, underappreciated, how good he was in that postseason run last year. Saw this morning on Twitter as people were kind of giving their kudos to Jrue Holiday for all that he did in Boston, both on the court and off the court. And, think back to game 2 of the NBA Finals last season, 26 points, 11 rebounds, 11 of 14 shooting. That's a pretty incredible performance. And that's before, we knew what was going to happen with that series, in which, other than, game 4, the Celtics, for the most part, kind of controlled that series. That was a major, major factor, was the way that Jrue Holiday played, especially in the absence of Kristaps Porzingis. Him being able to step up and really, from about halfway through that Cleveland series, through the Indiana series, all the way through the Maverick series, he was the absolute best version that we got to witness of Jrue Holiday. So that has to be said first and foremost. Shout out to Jrue Holiday and everything that he brought to the Celtics. Definitely felt like this last season, a little bit of a step back. Could be age, could be he went right from the finals to the Olympics, and it's just a long season, a lot of basketball, a lot of miles. And by no means do I think that Jrue Holiday is done having quality basketball in the NBA, but it's certainly not at the level of which it's tough to justify paying the contract that he's at. So here we are, and this brings us to where we had to get to based on the CBA and all these different restrictions that we've gotten into. The Celtics had to make a move like this. We knew something like this was coming. Like I said, didn't expect Portland, didn't expect Anfernee Simons, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about how Jrue Holiday for Anfernee Simons looks on the court. That's step one. So with Anfernee Simons, a couple of things that are all very obvious. You get much younger. Jrue Holiday is 35. Anfernee Simons is 26. He's on an expiring contract. Keep that in mind. We'll circle back to that when we get to the contract and salary portion of this trade. Offensively, this is going to be a guy that you can get really excited about. He's got juice on the ball. He can be a catch and shoot option as well. And I think, especially when you put into context of Jason Tatum not being on this team, or expecting him to miss the whole season. We don't know, but let's just operate under that assumption that he's not going to be there. This team was going to struggle for some self-creation on ball. Jaylen Brown can do it. I think looking at least who we think is going to be on this team next year, Peyton Pritchard might be second in that. And sixth man of the year. Like, I love Peyton Pritchard, but that's a pretty big burden for him to have to carry. Derek White, he's so smart, but he's not necessarily going to, just be somebody that can self-grade. He can certainly pick his moments, but it's not going to be in the same way that you have that beast of Jalen and Jason being able to be those stars. And Simons offensively can be a star. Overall, he's not, that well-rounded. And we'll talk about the defensive side here in a second, but he's a really reliable shooter. He's going to shoot somewhere in that high 30s, potentially around 40%. And this has been on a Portland team that's been rebuilding for the last several years. So you have to think, when you add him to Derek White, to Jaylen Brown, to Peyton Pritchard, to, we'll see what happens with the Porzingis, Horford, other pieces around, but certainly a better roster. He's going to get better looks. He's going to have more opportunities to score. And I think that type of juice is going to be really important in a wide open East, that the Celtics are trying to straddle this line of how do we remain competitive, but also set our books up going forward so that we're the best version of ourselves when we get Tatum back in a year. So it's a really interesting line to try to figure out where to be. And I think with the Simons move, I really like it, because I think next year, with the context that we have of this team, what he gives you offensively was probably going to be more important than what Jrue gives you from a veteran leadership standpoint, from the defensive capabilities. And, we saw Jrue's three-point shot kind of come back to earth a little bit this past season. He was lights out. I think the first year he was like 60% from the corner, something ridiculous. And, that just wasn't the case this year. And as much as a 60-win team can show some inconsistencies, I think part of that, and collectively the Celtics as a whole, mostly shot below their weight compared to what they had the year previous. And so I think that's a part of it. And so I think when you look at what you lose on defense, because while Simons was a part of a Portland team that second half of the year had one of the better defenses, and, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm locked into Portland. This is all stuff that you can find on NBA.com. You can go through the stats. Portland had a really nice defense and had definitely some pieces, on their roster that's where their mindset is. And that's part of why I would assume they want Holiday to just really lean in to that defensive mindset. But he wasn't one of the guys that was going to provide you that defensive prowess. So there is certainly a trade-off. And I think when you look at this roster for next year, I think it's actually probably more important to have what Simons gives you offensively than what you're losing with Jrue Holiday on the defensive end, because without Jason Tatum, there's just such a massive hole. You're going to be flawed. But I think there's going to be other ways, and we'll see, because this roster's not done being tweaked. We'll see what this means for how they continue to go about, whether it's shedding salary, who they draft, and what that means for the team that's going to be around Derek White, Anfernee Simons, Jaylen Brown. And the other part of this is I was talking with Kari Thompson on our latest podcast, and we were saying this is a big year for Mazzulla ball, right? This is a big year to see Joe Mazzulla, the coach. What is that actual evolution? What does that look like? Simons, for an offensive style of Mazzulla ball, this fits perfectly. This fits like a glove. And so I think this is kind of telling you a little bit, depending on some of the other moves that come about, that Brad Stevens is going to try to get Joe Mazzulla the players that he needs to be successful. And I think success in what that is going into the season will be defined by the next couple of moves that this will dictate. But I think from a roster on-court fit, I like what Simon gives offensively. The trade-off defensively, it is what it is. I without Tatum, there's always going to be a really big hole on both sides of the ball. And so we'll see how they fill that out. But I think between Holiday and Simons, if I'm looking at them as individual players in a vacuum, I'm probably choosing Holiday over Simons. But given the circumstances and everything else around it, I think this is tremendous value by Brad Stevens right here to be able to pull this off, get a guy this much younger with this much juice offensively. And, I was wrong. I really thought the Celtics were going to have to attach a first-round pick to get off Holiday. They get 2 seconds in this. You can scoff at it, but 2 seconds, we see those be, pieces that can help finish a deal, get a deal across the line all the time. So I don't look at those as minor pieces. To be able to get those in return, I think that's a really, really nice job by Brad Stevens here. And then this kind of takes us into the contract side of what this is, of what this deal does for the Celtics. And while it does save the Celtics money, saves them roughly about $4.7 million is what I've seen from different sources here about what this will be from Holiday to Simons. But Simons is on an expiring deal. And so this is kind of the thought process that I think we had gone through in a lot of our mock trades is when trading Jrue Holiday, I would have liked to have saved a little bit more salary, but that 4.7 million is really about 46-ish million with the tax bill. So there's that part of it as well. And so if they're going to try to get under the second apron, there's still, according to Keith Smith and others, about 18 more million to go. So we'll see in the coming days how much of a top priority that is to do it all at once this offseason, or if this is a slow build. But what Simons does from a contract perspective is gives you that expiring deal, which again, this is something in a lot of the mock trades that we had, the ideal return was going to be somebody that you could essentially shave a little bit of money off from Jrue Holiday and then get a kind of free look at for a year. It's obviously not exactly free, but you don't have that long-term commitment. You shed that salary going forward. And so now you have a chance to see what Simons look like. Does he mesh with Derek White? Does he mesh with Jaylen Brown? Can you envision how he fits in with Jason Tatum? And then you have the opportunity to either sign or extend him during the season or after the season. And on the flip side, if it doesn't work out, now you have these options of you can trade him again in season. Maybe there's another move along. There was a long connection of him to Orlando. Obviously, they filled that hole with Desmond Bane. Someone's always looking for shooting. And especially on an expiring deal, there's going to be potentially a market. And, my co-host Greg made this point on Instagram. Maybe there's that first round at the deadline when someone's looking around like, hey, maybe we can get a first round pick for Anfernee Simons, later on. There's that option. The other option is, being on that expiring, depending how much money this ownership group is willing to eat, maybe there is still all the restrictions. And especially with Jason Tatum out, we're kind of treating this as the quasi gap year anyways, that let's say they make no other moves, right? They don't even trade Hauser. They keep KP, they draft whoever at 28 and 32 later this week. They'll figure out the big man situation, but let's just say it's roughly a similar setup to what we have today as we're talking here on June 24th. What you are left with at kind of a worst case scenario is at the end of next year, KP's 30 million. Anfernee Simons is about 27 million plus. You've got 57 million bucks that is coming fresh off your books for you to be able to reset. And I don't know exactly where that puts you. It certainly should get you under those aprons, get you back into an area where Brad Stevens can be a little bit more creative with some of his moves and how you want to set this up. You'll have Jason Tatum coming back fresh. So I think that was a big part of a lot of the mock trades that we made is how can you save money, but then leave yourself with the opportunity to ideally get a look at somebody that you like. And this is where PJ Washington, who was on an expiring, came up a lot. Daniel Gafford, who formerly was on an expiring, just got an extension last night as well. That was another one of the Shams news bombs that dropped last night. Those were appealing guys. Rui Hachimura, who maybe still is on the board. We'll see with some of the KP rumors that are out there. But that's why guys like that were appealing. And Anfernee Simons, who was just completely off my radar, did not see this coming for him. But I think he fits that same thought process. Now, it's not quite as much money as probably would have liked, but offseason's not done, and we'll have to see. I know there was a report today that potentially they may hold off on finalizing this trade, maybe expand it a little bit more. We'll have to see. But I think this has to be considered a really, really good job by Brad Stevens to be able to get off that Holiday contract, not give up a first round pick, get 2 seconds back, get a younger quality player that you can get an entire year to evaluate if you choose, or potentially just give you all those other options that I listed out. So, while it's a sad day and, the shirt I'm looking at right now, this starting five of the Boston Celtics that won us banner 18 is no more. It's sad in that sense to see Jrue Holiday go. And I'll be honest, I don't really know what Portland's plans are. I was hoping, just because I like Jrue and I really appreciate what Jrue did for the culture of the Celtics, what he did to bring back this championship here. I was kind of hoping he'd get a chance to be on a team that's in the mix. And, at best, Portland's scrapping for a play-in spot in just a really, really difficult West. So maybe he gets rerouted again at some point. Kevin O'Connor on Twitter brought up a great point that, maybe it's not this year, but maybe next year. Holiday gives you a real meaty salary for a team that's not as hamstrung as the Celtics by it, that potentially they can go ahead and use that as a bigger deal with a younger asset and some draft picks. And you need that salary. And I think, Jalen Green being part of the Kevin Durant trade is a great example of the Rockets gave him that deal as, yeah, you got potential. He's okay. I don't know if I love this deal, but if we need to go get somebody who's more expensive, we now have $30 million to plug in. It's part of the reason that probably the Spurs weren't super enthused to go ahead and get Kevin Durant at that salary, because now they still have the Devin Vassell, the Keldon Johnson, the Harrison Barnes contract. If they want to go make another move, if Giannis ever comes available, or somebody of that, that tier of contract, they have those guys that can help get you to that point with those other assets. And so that is something that the Blazers are doing, but I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and worry about that part of this trade too much. I hope Jrue finds a way to be happy and get into the competitive landscape. I want to see that for him, just for everything that he's done for us here in the city of Boston. But I'm going to have more thoughts on this, still trying to digest everything here. We've got a podcast coming up on Thursday morning at Nick NBA, who does some really great Celtics coverage and breakdowns. He's going to join me day after round one. So we're going to record on Thursday. Don't know the exact time yet. We'll put it out on Twitter here. So make sure you guys are following along. But we'll have reactions to whoever, if the Celtics make a first round pick, if they make a trade, whatever happens Wednesday night. Absolute chance for more chaos to ensue. We'll give you all of our thoughts on that. Plus, we'll have more on this trade, and then we'll also try to dig into a little bit of these KP rumors, as it doesn't feel like the Celtics are done. They're at least listening. The Lakers, the Pelicans, the Warriors, the Spurs, they're all rumors out there. So we'll have more of that coming up here on Thursday. But Jrue Holiday, again, salute to you. Anfernee Simons, welcome to Boston. Brad, this is fun, man. Hey, listen, I don't know how it's going to work out on the court, but this is going to be a fun offseason. We're not going to be short on content, and we'll have more for you guys on this coming up later. Enjoy the rest of your week, and see you guys after the first round of the draft.